Yeah, Albert, the first time I'd heard you play was I got one of those Star Licks cassettes. It had 20 of your licks,
Yeah.
and I was absolutely blown out. I'd never heard anyone play like that. I'm interested, how does a really unique player like yourself develop a unique style? What's the process?
Well, it just started out listening to rock and roll records and trying to copy the solos, and I probably just honed in on certain things that appealed to me, and my style developed because of that. In England at the time, there weren't a lot of players who were focusing on that. Everybody wanted to play like B.B. King and Freddie King, and I was kind of veering towards the country players, and playing a Telecaster. Not many people were playing Telecasters in England in the 60s, so my style kind of developed because of that, I think.
Who were the players that you'd listen to?
Well, it started out with Scotty Moore, with Elvis. Cliff Gallup was a big influence, who played with Gene Vincent. He was on the first two Gene Vincent albums. James Burton, of course, with Ricky Nelson. I mean, the master of the telly, just a great sound. And my all-time favourite player at that time, and still is really, is a guy called Jimmy Bryant, who was a country swing player.
Do you work from scales or licks? You have a vocabulary of licks. How do you approach putting a solo together?
Well, I mean, I don't really put a lot of thought into it, I'm thinking on positions, work from position to position, I see these shapes and I'm working from shape to shape. And, I'm lucky that I have a fairly fluid technique that I'm able to get around like that. And if I make a mistake, it'll take me in another direction that I hadn't really intended to go, But I don't think that far ahead when I do solos like that,
You do tend to have quite a phenomenal facility on the neck. You're quite fast. Is that something you worked on or just seemed to come naturally?
It came, it just came together in the 60s, really. I was listening to a lot of Jimmy Bryant was my all-time favourite, as I said, and he was kind of a country swing player, It's a swing style, really, but with a country leaning, That probably wasn't a good example, but it
sounded good to me. Yeah, the first record I heard that you were on, or the earliest one, was Head, Hands and Feet. Could you tell us a little about that band? What sort of music it was playing and what its musical aspirations were?
Well, very grandiose aspirations, actually, because it was basically two writers, Tony Colton and Ray Smith, and they'd been playing in a band for a few years. And then they were writing a lot of songs, and then I ended up doing some demos with them. And then they got a recording deal, and I ended up being like a session guitar player on their first album. It's called Poet and the One Man Band. And then they decided to put another band together a little later on, and that became Head, Hands and Feet. And there were just so many different influences in that band. They loved like the big ballads, but they also like straight ahead rock and roll, and they like country, and that's the way the albums turned out. It was hard to pigeonhole the band, really. We played a bit of everything, and I always wanted, from the early 60s when I first met the Everly Brothers, I always wanted to go to Los Angeles, but it was 10 years before I got there. It was, my first trip really was in like maybe 71 with Head, Hands and Feet. And as soon as I got there and started playing the clubs, I thought, boy, this is where I want to be. The kind of music that I was doing seemed to be more appreciated there than it was in London at the time. So I began to spend more time there, and then I had a brief spell with Joe Cocker. And then I joined Emmylou Harris, and I realised at that time that I'm exactly where I want to be, playing in a great country band, and she was doing really well at the time. So I moved to LA at that time. That was '76.
Did she ask you to join, or how did it come about?
Oh well, I landed in LA, and I was going out playing all the local bars, and I was sitting in with all my heroes. You know, we used to play this bar once a week, and Don Everly was the lead singer, and Buddy Emmons was playing steel guitar, and there'd be Byron Berline, John Hartford, Doug Dillard, and all these, well-known country guys at the time. You know, West Coast country guys. So I immediately became known to all these players and accepted by them, you know. And I played with some of Emmy's band in that situation, you know. And I'd played, previous to that, I'd played with the Crickets, Buddy Holly's old band, and Glendy Harding was the piano player with the Crickets. So, and he was also, afterwards, after he quit Elvis, he was playing with Emmylou. You know, so they all knew about me, and I, in actual fact, happened to go along to a gig and went backstage afterwards, and they said, "Oh, Albert, we've been thinking about you. You know, we need someone to fill in for James for the next week or so. You know." And make a long story short, I ended up with the gig. But when I first joined the band, I was replacing my hero, James Burton. You know, so he went off to play with Elvis. So. I was required to play certain signature things that he'd done on some of the records, but after a while, they were okay with me just doing what I wanted to do. You know, I didn't change it a lot, but I made it my own. You know.
The thing with Eric Clapton, how did that come about? Did you know him from the '60s during?
Yeah. Well, we played the same circuit. I was with a guy called Chris Farlow and the Thunderbird. It was a good R&B band, you know, and we were all based at this club called the Flamingo Club in the West End of London, and Eric was playing with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, and there were a lot of other great bands around at that time, you know. So we knew each other then, and then I ran into him a couple of times when he was with Cream, and he was a good friendly guy, and we admired each other's playing, you know. And it was years later that we ended up on a session together, recording with a guy called Mark Benno. And Eric had just done a tour without a rhythm guitar player, you know. This was around the time of Low Down Sally. So he needed somebody to do that while he did the solos, you know. So, I mean, who's going to turn him down? You know, what a great gig, you know. So. I went out on the road with Eric, and that lasted about 5 years.
You were on the live album at the time with Eric Clapton. Did you do any studio recording?
Well, yeah, I did 3 records with him. I did the Live in Japan, you know, just one night, and then we did 2 albums in Nassau in the Bahamas. We did Money and Cigarettes and Just Another Ticket.
What's the most memorable period of your career? What do you think of most fondly?
Well, I really enjoyed the time with Emmylou. That lasted a couple of years, and that band was just great. That was great fun. I did 20 years with the Everly Brothers, and they were always heroes of mine. You know, just great singers, and so that was a good period. And of course, you know, I can't deny that 5 years with Clapton wasn't a lot of fun. You know, but I've done a lot of things since then. You know, I've had my own band in Europe for the last 20 years, and Albert Lee and Hogan's Heroes. I didn't name the band, by the way, but we work a lot, you know, and I've really improved my chops and my singing through playing with that band, you know, because I'm having to sing a lot, you know, and play the piano. And I've been playing with Bill Wyman for the last 8 years too, so that's good fun, you know. It's kind of an R&B, bit of blues, bit of rockabilly, bit of everything really. It's like anything from a 9 to a 12-piece band, depends on who's available, you know.
Yeah, actually, the last time I was in London, I think I saw an ad for that band, and you had Martin Taylor.
Yeah, Martin was in the band for a while, and Peter Frampton played in the band, Andy Fairweather Low, Georgie Fame. You know, had a few people through the band, you know, and it's I never know when I show up who's going to be playing, you know.
Albert, it's been an absolute pleasure. Better let you get ready for your workshop, but thanks so much for giving us the interview.